Odds and Ends by Corndog_Patrol and For the Wolfie on AO3. Chapter 6 The Devil's Trill. Shouta was finally ready to start taking his own plan seriously. He had to get close to Hizashi Yamada as much as he hated it, or else this would all be in vain. So while the last thing he wanted to do was have dinner with a leech, when Nomori had practically begged him to cheer Hisashi up by joining him, despite having already eaten his own dinner, then he'd seen a chance to improve his standing. He didn't really believe that Hisashi said about not drinking his blood, about simply wanting to help someone less fortunate, but pointing out his lie would have risked a return trip to Emi, despite whatever the lamp claimed. So, Shouta had suggested the tour Hisashi had been so disappointed to lose earlier. It had immediately made the blonde brighten. Now Hisashi was leading them through the gardens by the light of the moon. Well, they each had a glass of port. It was red like blood, and Shouta had been hesitant to take a sip at first, but he'd been surprised by how good it tasted. It was a far cry from the cheap shrill he called wine in the past. I will bore you with all of it, Hisashi said, his voice sounding softer now. Over there is a vegetable patch where Oboro grows stuff for the meals. There's also some fruit trees along the side of the manor. A lot of stuff doesn't get delivered through. Oh, and don't worry, Oboro gets some extra gardeners to help, so he isn't doing it alone. Why do you have so few staff? Hisashi looked at him, surprised by the question. He sipped his wine as he considered it. Because they're all my friends, and I want to keep them as safe as possible. I'm sure you don't need to be an expert on vampires to know we're all weird. We're a family of misfits. I've talked to them before about bringing in more staff to ease their workload, but every time they convince me otherwise. Traditionally and all that jazz. Hisashi wasn't wrong about that. They all seemed unconventional, but Shouta couldn't let his guard down around any of them. Any vamp had the potential to be dangerous in the right or wrong circumstances. Whether he was slaying a wanted leech or capturing one for trial, Shouta had never underestimated a vampire, and that was the reason he was still alive. He wouldn't start underestimating them now. His mind was drawn back to the blonde before him, his colors muted in the dark veil of night. Even though Shouta couldn't stand vamps, least of all this one, this side of Hisashi was at least preferable to the side he'd initially shown when he signed the paperwork. I can help in the gardens, Shouta said. If he was useful, then Hisashi wouldn't take him back to Eme. You know how to garden? Shouta nodded and scratched the back of his neck. We used to have a veggie patch too, at the orphanage. He murmured the last part, but there was no way Hisashi hadn't heard it with his vamp hearing. I'm sure Oboro would appreciate the help. Hisashi smiled and thankfully didn't comment on the last part. I'll show you to the lake. They walked to the shoreline, the moon glistening across the surface, with an array of stars as the backdrop. At the center was the second fountain, with another angel holding a bowl, with water pouring down, although this time it was held above the figure's head, and there were no cheer-ups. Its wings were more pronounced than the other, stretching wide as it offered the babbling water to the heavens. Now this one's impossible to get, Hisashi said as he drew 2 coins from his pocket. However, if you could land a coin in the bowl, it said that your wish is guaranteed to come true. You ever land it? Hisashi looked sheepish. No, but I've come super close before. I saw once Tensei landed it too, but he didn't tell me what he wished for. He offered one of the coins to Shouta, and threw his own. Hisashi's throw's technique was sound, but it was aimed too low, so it bounced off the Angel Stone's arms and toppled into the lake below, unsuccessfully. Shouta wondered how many coins were lost to the lake, wasted, but that didn't stop him from wanting to try. He threw the coin high and watched as it disappeared into the stone bowl, making a satisfying pop as it broke the water's surface. Perhaps it wasn't smart to show off his vampire slayer precision training, but there was little risk with showing off a little. Whoa! Hisashi laughed with amusement. If Shouta hadn't hated vampires so much, he might have considered it a nice sound, like a joyful bell in the breeze. That's amazing. You have crazy beginner's luck. Shouta didn't correct him. So, what are you gonna wish for? It's a secret. He wished his plan would succeed. Once it warms up more, we can go swimming in the lake. It's really pleasant in the summer. Hisashi grinned, his smile lighting up like a sun. Should have felt no need to tell him he wouldn't be there by summer. Oh, last is the gazebo. Hisashi hurried towards the side of the lake, where Shouta could already see a tall white plain gazebo overlooking the surface. Its roof and sides were covered by blooming fluorescent flowers, while it was surrounded by soft hydras. With the glow of the moon, the place looked otherworldly. Oh, wait! Hisashi turned quickly. You go on ahead and check it out. I forgot something. He hurried back to the house, but Shouta doubted he was trying to set up some elaborate trap, so he obeyed his directions. There was a small ramp that led into it, although a slight change in the paintwork hinted that the ramp was newer. It must have had stairs once upon a time. Shouta entered the gazebo, and the sweet aroma of flowers helped him find peace for the first time in weeks. The structure had benches built into its interior frame, and he found a seat that neighbored the lake. Everything was quiet, save for the splash of Florentine fountain, and he felt as if he had been transported to another world. He couldn't remember the last time he had a moment like this. The tranquility was lost, however, by the sound of Hisashi hurrying back. Sorry about that. He apologized, although he should have apologized for returning rather than leaving. One moment. Hisashi set down a case he brought with him and pulled out a violin. Nomura had told Shouta during his tour that Hisashi was a popular musician, and she had shown him the music room. But at the time, Shouta had paid little interest. Is it okay if I play for you? There's one I'm planning to perform soon, and I like to practice it with an audience. It's called the Devil's Trilled Sonata by Trini. The piece goes for about 15 minutes, but I'll just play the first move for you. It shouldn't be too long. Shouta nodded, prepared to hear the worst sound of his life. But then Hisashi put his bow to the string and started to play, and the tune started off Morse. The notes were long and trilled, and there was a suspense to the sound. It wasn't a tune he recognized, although it was hypnotic. He couldn't look away from the sight of Hisashi playing the violin, surrounded on all sides by the white wooden pillars and hanging moonlit flowers. His emerald green eyes were closed in concentration as he played pure from memory, and the movements of the bow were completely alien to Shouta. Did he have a music work? He had no clue how vampires could create such a sweet sound. No, he had no idea how anyone could. It ended far too soon. Hisashi stopped, opened his eyes, and looked directly into Shota's soul. For a moment, he was completely breathless. But then Shouta nodded, and he wasn't sure why. Hisashi must have understood, though, as he smiled proudly and resumed playing. The violin split up for the second section, astronomically quick. The sound was more cheerful, too, each note short and sharp in its delivery. His left hand moved like a spider along the string while the bow moved in the fluid blur. Shouta was completely hypnotized by the performance. For 15 minutes, he watched in complete awe as Hisashi played his heart out, to the point where beads of sweat dotted his forehead. Even Shouta, who had so little knowledge of music, could understand how impressive the piece was, and by the time it ended, the vamp had managed to earn some respect from the slayer. Hisashi was panting as he finished, and sweat ran from his forehead, but his eyes shone with pride and joy. Shouta was once again reminded of how handsome the vampire was, although this time it was realized less begrudgingly than the first time. Well? Asked Hisashi. A piece of the blonde's hair stuck to his cheek. How was that? Beautiful, mesmerizing, inspiring. Fine, Shouta managed, and even that was high praise coming from him. The grin that stretched across Sasashi's face told him he understood the compliment. Promise it isn't my quirk. Huh? Music isn't my quirk. Hisashi kneeled and returned the violin to the case as he wiped the sweat from his brows. Just a lot of practice. A lot of practice is your quirk? Shouta cringed a little. He hadn't intended to make a joke. Hisashi laughed too, which made it even worse. I wish. I love the piece so much, though. The composer wrote it after having a dream about the devil playing it. He seemed excited by that fact. Did the devil teach you to play? Shota's own question surprised him. Despite this, the vamp was still his enemy, as most leeches were. He hadn't intended to make a first joke, let alone a second. However, Hisashi's face grew bitter. Something like that. He stood and gestured to the house. That's pretty much the tour. Everything else is just gravel, grass, and flowers. Let's head back before they notice we're gone. Shouta nodded and followed him. Their wine glasses empty, but as they approached the mayor, they noticed 4 figures watching them. He expected Khan to explode with anger, but instead they all looked calm. Shouta hadn't been the only audience to Hisashi's violin. Hey, Shouta, Hisashi said before they were in earshot of the others. Thank you. I was having a pretty terrible night, but I'm really looking forward to getting to know you better. Before any words were spoken, Hisashi hurried on to talk with the other vamps, while Nomori smiled knowingly at Shouta. For a night spent with a vampire, he supposed it hadn't been so terrible after all. 13 days remaining. Hisashi woke up cheery, humming to himself as he pulled on some nice clothes. His schedule was packed tight, as his friend Hagari was throwing a fancy 2-day soiree, and he'd asked Hisashi to play for the first night. However, that wasn't the reason he woke up with such high spirits. Although his date with Muscular had gone horribly, he had a chance to spend time with Shouta, and even though it was clear that they were still far from friends, they were hopefully a little closer to an understanding. Shouta probably still hated him, yet he had been nicer company than most suitors invited to the Yamada mayor. Hisashi didn't want to think about that too deeply, though. He had a sortie to get ready for. First, however, Hisashi was dying to quench his thirst. He told Shouta he wouldn't drink from him if he didn't want to, and he was determined to keep that promise. Besides, Shota's blood acted as an aphrodisiac, and Hisashi didn't want to take risk acting foolishly around the human. Hisashi finished dressing and put on his monocle before setting out for a pre-breakfast drink. He headed for the kitchen to find it empty. That didn't bother him at all, however, as he opened the blood bank icebox and pulled out a bag of chilled B-type blood. He hadn't expected to drink the bagged stuff again after getting his own donor, but he shouldn't have been so hasty, since it was a lot to adjust to. Hisashi filled a pot of water from the tap and started warming it on the stove, before tossing the bag in to warm it up. While some of the others didn't mind cold blood, it made his teeth ache unpleasantly. He was peacefully disturbed when the door opened and Nomori stepped in. "Morning," she said cheerily. "How'd your date go?" He rolled his eyes and leaned against the bench while waiting for the blood to warm. "It went horribly. Muscular was a total rat bag." "Oh, I know that one was a disaster. I meant your date with Shouta." Hisashi narrowed his eyes. "Knowing you begged him to try and make amends with me," he pointed out. "And I bet he's already eaten his dinner beforehand." She shrugged, but it was practically an admission of guilt. The woman moved to sink and rolled her tight sleeves so she could wash her hands. Hisashi couldn't help himself from glancing at her arms and the innumerable vampire bites that land her wrists alone. When she first arrived, she wouldn't have rolled up her sleeves with anyone else so near, especially a vampire. But they were practically family now, and she felt comfortable with him. Boiling blood? She asked, paying no attention to the bite marks on her arm. Why not see Shouta for a bite instead? Because I want him to feel comfortable here? He took the pot off the stove and found a pair of tongs to pull the bag out. After a lifetime of this, he was an expert at finding a perfect temperature that wasn't too hot or too cold. Don't think I don't see what you're trying to do. I'm not going to sleep with him. Why not? She asked with a pout, while she dried her hands. Everyone knows you haven't gotten any since you became a big hotshot bachelor, and we're all too much like family to be bangable. You managed to land a donor who is exactly your type, and you're not even gonna try to seduce him? Come on. He scratched his arm sheepishly. You know he's from an old bloodline, right? Well, his blood has a certain side effect. A shame you aren't into somnophilia, she said with a lamentable sigh. No, his blood doesn't put vamps to sleep. He inhaled and exhaled and quickly added, It's an aphrodisiac. He hid his face in time for her to crackle. Wow! Hisashi, you can't not seduce him. This is too perfect. Hisashi huffed. He's scared of vampires. He's really not, Nemuri said with a shrug, drawing his attention as she pulled her sleeves back down. He hates all of you, and it's clear he doesn't trust us, since he keeps checking his food for poison, but he isn't scared of vampires. The only thing I think he's scared of is being sent back. How can you tell? You remember how I acted when I first came here, she said, her voice deeper. Trust me, he isn't scared. Hisashi frowned and brought the blood bag to his mouth to drink, just as he was interrupted again by the kitchen door. In stepped Shouta, sweaty and without a shirt on. Hisashi was completely caught off guard by the sight. He hadn't seen his chest before. The human was far more muscular than Hisashi had realized, and his scent was positively appetizing, even with the room's distance. His skin was littered with so many scars, though. What brought him back to reality, however, was the feeling of something slipping from his hands, and the sound of whatever it was popping on the floor. Warm liquid stained his clothes, but it was only when the scent of hot blood hit his nostrils that he realized his error. He cursed, although the sound came out oddly, thanks to his extended fangs. His eyes burned with frenzy, fueled even further by how thirsty he was. If he had been alone, he might have tried to drink the mess off the floor. Sorry, he croaked as Nemuri indebtedly grabbed for the mop. What a waste, she said with a sigh, although her mouth was tightly locked in a wolfish grin. Hisashi backed away from the mess and grabbed the counter, his claws automatically extending to dig into it. Shouta looked tense, and Hisashi assumed it was due to fear. But somewhere in his mind, Nemuri's words kicked in. He wasn't scared. He was prepared. Hisashi's attention was caught on Shota's body again. Shouta must have been exercising just before, and with his added frenzy, Hisashi could hear his blood pumping through his veins. The memory of Shota's taste was the second memory that consumed his thoughts. It had been so good. Hisashi's hands trembled, but he gripped the bench even tighter. Before he realized it, Shouta was closer than before. He now stood between him and Nemuri. Drink, Shouta said as he moved his hair from his neck. The two dots were scarred from where Hisashi had tasted him the night they met. There were two target points ready for him. It would be so easy to close in on the human, to drink his fill, but Hizashi refused to slip into his animalistic frenzy. Promised wouldn't. He forced out, even though his eyes refused to bulge from the offered neck. Blood bank. But be blood. He tried to gesture to the icebox, but he couldn't let go of the bench, lest he did something he regretted. However, Shouta only moved closer to him. Just drink, it's what you brought me for. Their bodies pressed together. Shouta felt so hot, and the scent of blood was practically erased by the scent of his skin. It's fine. Hisashi's face was pressed to his neck, and Shouta held him now, bracing him against the bench so he couldn't escape. Relief was so close, and yet he finally let go of the bench and wrapped his arms around Shouta. However, he was careful with his claws. Shota's body already had so many scars. He tuned his ears to the sound of the human's steady heartbeat and kept his nose focused on the sweat as he pressed into him with everything except his teeth. Hizashi wasn't an animal. He wasn't him. He focused on the feeling of being held, of long black hair brushing against his face, the smell of Shouta, and the smallest hint of archaic silver. No, Hizashi managed to say, his voice strained between his starved fangs. I won't. Okay, would you look at that? Oh my god. Okay, so I have some things that I want to talk about. So, first is the whole comment that Shouta has in his head, the whole, if he wasn't a vamp, it would have been a nice sound, right? You know, Hisashi's laughter, for those who have forgotten or whatever. Shouta, just admit it, he's attractive. Stop being a bigot. Oh my god. I understand why he's a bigot. He has trauma or whatever, but like at the same time, my dude, stop. His little wish that he did for his fountain, I also wish for his plan to succeed. You guys don't know what the plan is. I know what the plan is. I need his plan to succeed. Okay? I also wish for his plan to succeed. The whole Shouta thought point of the whole mesmerizing, beautiful, inspiring, and then he just replies with, fine. I'm sorry. That was, I love that. That is hilarious. So, Shouta has this whole thing of like, oh yeah, you know, Hizashi, but like he's a vampire though, right? It's that whole like, if Hizashi was a human, I'm pretty sure Shouta would be head over heels with Hizashi by now, but because Hizashi is not a human, you know, Shouta is like, no, I'm not falling. That's not happening. It's a vampire. I can't let my guard down. Because he's so big and mighty. I don't know why I said it like that. But yeah, it's very interesting. I don't have much to say. I will say, though, I want that gazebo, please and thank you. I feel like that would be very pretty. I've always wanted to be in a gazebo. I've always wanted to kiss somebody under a gazebo. Please, thank you. It's all I wish for. After I get that, I could die happily. Please and thank you. Alright, as always, my raindrops, make sure to eat, sleep, drink water, take your meds. Have a wonderful day or night. Join our community Discord server, link is in the description. Subscribe to see more of my content, and thank you so much for watching.